High Command probing whether Copes were involved in the Maroon standoff. Reginald Allen 18 hours ago. Hong Maroon Chief Richard Curry. The Police High Command has launched a probe to establish whether legitimate police officers attempted to raid farms belonging to Maroons of Betsuan in the cockpit country area on Tuesday. The probe was launched after several videos were released on social media of what appeared to be armed men in confrontation with the Maroons over attempts to destroy and take possession of marijuana and other crops belonging to the farmers. In one of the videos, the Maroons, marching with drums and blowing instruments, demanded that one of the armed men leave their lands. Interestingly, the armed man, who had a rifle in his hand, had what appeared to be an identification card around his neck. "I'm not joking," the armed man said as the Maroons advanced towards him. "We not joke. We know WI rights," responded one of the Maroons in the group. Leader of the Hong Maroons, Colonel Richard Curry, in two Instagram posts, blasted the actions of the armed individuals who he alleged to have been members of the Jamaica Constabulary Force (JCF). On Tuesday, I was alerted by the Maroons of Betsuan that road members of the JCF have returned to the area to extort money in return for not cutting their crops, alleged Curry in the Instagram post on Tuesday. Note this is not the first, second or third time the Maroons have witnessed this violation. We would like to know if this is an official operation approved by the Jamaica Constabulary Force to cut down crops in Maroon territory, he questioned. He elaborated that, upon investigation, we realized these were not honorable members of the JCF. These were men, 6 in total, posing in casual clothes bearing high-powered rifles that were pointed at the Maroon people on our land. They came and left in a big police truck and we have the license plate for further investigations. On Wednesday, Curry told his Instagram followers that he also posted the video in which he is seen trying to calm his fellow Maroons. He subsequently told the armed men, one of whom appeared to be in a blue denim uniform, to lower their weapons, before telling them to leave the Maroon lands. Another video showed the armed men preparing to leave the area in a white truck, to the joy of the Maroons. Curry claimed that these supported officers of the law were planning on loading up the police trucks with Maroon crops again for their own personal retail. Further, he stated that Maroon cannabis ganja is not illegal in cockpit country. As chief, I maintain control over the crowds of Maroons who engaged to defend their land. The sound of the advent was heard for miles, which called all warriors to immediately come to defend their land and their chief. Our government continues to demand answers and accountability for this gross disrespect and violation of Maroon territorial jurisdiction. We never point the weapon at #Maroon and expect it will go silent. Sound diagbets, he wrote on Instagram. Under the Maroon Treaty of 1739, the Hong Maroons claimed that they operate under their own laws as a sovereign state. However, those claims have been questioned by persons within the legal profession nationally. Few days ago has taken from the Loop News August 10, 2021 to 55 p.m. Yet as the Rostums protest trimming National Security Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, Dr HORACE Chang, has warned that the government will not tolerate any infringement of the rights of Jamaicans in any setting. His call for all Jamaicans to be treated with dignity comes against the background of allegations that a 19-year-old Rastafarian woman, Nzinga King, had her locks trimmed by a policewoman while she was in lockup at the Four Paths police station in Clarendon on SOVERiGNTY breaches. Since the incident which allegedly took place last month, there have been conflicting reports of what really happened. For his part, Chang has sought to assure that the government of Jamaica firmly and unequivocally condemns all forms of ill treatment to its citizens and will take strong, decisive action against anyone who infringes on their rights. He made the declaration while providing an update on the ongoing investigations surrounding King's case. According to Chang, the government's position is clear. Everyone must be treated with dignity by the members of the Jamaica Constabulary Force. He also went on to say while we await the outcome of these investigations, there are two fundamental principles that we must never lose sight of as a people. The first is captured in Jamaica's Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, which underscores that whereas the state has an obligation to promote universal respect for, and observance of, human rights and freedoms, any person deprived of his liberty shall be treated humanely and with respect for the inherent dignity of the person. There is an absolute rejection by this government and the police high command of any instance or form of infringement on the rights of Jamaicans at the hands of any member of the constabulary force. We must reserve judgment and action until the investigations into allegations are finalized, Chang stated. He also urged Jamaicans to recognize and respect their cultural heritage, as it is only by anchoring ourselves onto that legacy that we will develop the roots we need for true national development. Any attempts to disrespect the culture is an indictment on all Jamaicans, and must never be condoned. Now, a couple days later, this maroon country in Asian allegation is now also a disrespect to the national heritage, even though he might try to refute the history for exterior and or ulterior motives. There are many maroon-run communities in Jamaica's cockpit country offering hiking experiences as well as camping, caving, bird watching and plain old nature loving. The Maroons are the first Jamaicans to own land. They also have extensive knowledge of the medicinal and nutritional values of the plants around them. People sometimes drive up to a campong for the annual festival on January 6th and also to discover the original trails of the Maroons. The hiking tour to Peace Cape near a campong, or for extreme knowledge on matters of botany and herbal medicine as well as the fascinating history of the people. Moortown was the home of Grand Nanny, the spiritual leader of Jamaica's Maroons and the country's first national hero. The campong is the second location of Cook Joe's village, named after one of his captains who became his successor. Charlestown was the home of Poau, another of the captains mentioned in the 1739 peace treaty. Each village has its own rich history. Peace Cape, also known as Ambush, was the site of the most important Maroon victory in the war against the British. It was here that the Campong Maroons were able to outmaneuver and decimate an entire regiment of redcoats, leading the British to talk truce after nearly 8 decades of fighting. Maroon historians say the treaty was a blood oath between Captain Kojo and Colonel Guthrie, sealed in a mystical ceremony inside the Cape walls. The Windward Maroons, led by Captain Poau of Charlestown, signed the treaty the following year, putting an official end to what is now known as the First Maroon War. The 2 subsequent wars were much shorter and involved only fractions of the island's Maroon community. History lesson for the Deputy Prime Minister Mr. Horace Chang. Here goes. The Maroons. Creativity and resistance. Maroon cultures. In 1739, more than 40 years before the United States won its War of Independence with Britain, the British government, then among the most powerful in the world, concluded 2 peace treaties on the island of Jamaica. Those with whom the British treated were neither European generals nor Native American chieftains. They were, rather, enslaved Africans who had managed to escape plantations and form new societies in the wilderness. For nearly a century, these communities had waged a devastating war against the colonists from their strongholds in the Jamaican hills. Unable to defeat them, the British were forced to propose treaties recognizing the freedom that those they had once held in bondage had already seized, and granting them land and partial political autonomy. The Jamaican treaties were not the first of their kind. Similar pacts had been made, for example, between colonial governments and communities of enslaved Africans in Hispaniola, Panama, Venezuela and Ecuador during the 16th century, and in Mexico, Colombia and Brazil during the 17th century. Yet other treaties were to follow the Jamaican ones, such as those made in Dutch Guyana during the 18th century. The story of the Maroons as those who fled from bondage and their descendants became known does not begin with these colonial treaties, but goes back to the very earliest days of European settlement and slavery in the Americas. In 1502, the mere 10 years after Columbus' first voyage, the first known African Maroon escaped his captors and fled into the interior of the island of Hispaniola. No one can say with certainty when the first Maroon community in the Americas was established, although there exists a written document confirming that by the early 1500s the settlement of Africans who escaped enslavement had already formed on Jamaica, an island off the northeastern coast of Hispaniola. Over the next 3.5 centuries, 100 more such Maroon communities were to emerge throughout the Americas, as slaves took their chances and broke away from the mines and plantations of the European colonizers in a bid for freedom and independence. Their exact numbers will never be known. The societies they created ranged in size from small bands of 10 or 20 individuals to powerful kingdoms with thousands of members. In many ways, the Maroon experience is emblematic of broader processes that helped shape the Western Hemisphere. Not only were Maroons in the forefront of resistance to slavery, they were among the first pioneers to explore and adapt to the more remote, unsettled spaces in the Caribbean. Maroons were among the first in the wave of 1492 to resist colonial domination, striving for independence, forging new cultures and identities, and developing solidarity out of diversity. Although there is a large and growing body of scholarly writing about Maroons based on solid archival research, relatively few people today are aware that such communities ever existed. Few history books used in schools give attention to the societies and cultures that Maroons successfully built away from the plantations. Contemporary Maroons, although many withstood military assaults for years, most Maroon communities were eventually destroyed by colonial troops, who usually outnumbered them and were much better armed. After the abolition of slavery, many Maroon groups were assimilated into the larger societies that surrounded them. Of the hundreds of such communities once spread across the hemisphere, only a few still exist. On the Caribbean island of Jamaica are some of the best-known contemporary Maroon communities. The Windward Maroons are based in the villages of Moortown, Scotch Hall in St. Mary, and Charlestown, in the eastern Blue Mountains. They can trace their origins as a people back to 1655, when the British seized the island from the Spanish, and a large number of people fled into the hills. In later years, these initial freedom seekers were joined by others from British plantations. The ancestors of the Leeward Maroons, whose main contemporary settlement is a Compton in the western cockpit country, began to escape from plantations in the late 17th century. By the 1730s, both groups posed such a threat to the plantation system that the British colonial government had to sue for peace, concluding separate treaties with the two groups in 1739. Adaptation and survival in a new world. It is difficult for us today to imagine the challenges faced by the earliest Maroons. Runaways who banded together usually came from several different parts of Africa, and thus were divided by differences of culture and language. They found themselves in new and largely unfamiliar environments, in constant danger of recapture. Such an attack by colonial troops remained a permanent possibility. Developing means of subsistence and defense were the primary demands of this new world. But the struggle for survival was not limited to learning how to live off the land or fend off invaders. In fact, it required the creation of whole new societies, cultures and languages. In forming Maroon communities, culturally diverse people were drawn into a complex process of adaptation. They were obliged to adapt not only to the natural environment, but to one another's different ways of speaking, working, praying, governing, staking claims, making music, courting, marrying, giving birth, bequeathing and dying. In devising methods of subsistence, military strategies, systems of authority and shared languages, Maroons typically selected from the full range of cultural resources available to them, African, Native American and European. The breadth of this spectrum of resources improved their chances for survival. The music, dance, verbal arts and spiritual traditions of contemporary Maroon peoples, however, are predominantly African in origin. But even though there are exceptions, the Creole languages spoken by contemporary Maroons have vocabularies primarily of European origin, though they contain substantial numbers of African and Native American words as well. At a deeper level, the sound patterns and certain stylistic features of these languages clearly reflect the influence of African languages. Even those contemporary Maroon cultural traditions that are most recognizably of African origin are outcomes of a process that long ago blended diverse elements from a variety of different African cultures. For this reason, the cultures of Maroons today are Creolite. Creolization has occurred widely in the Americas over the last 500 years and continues to lend our multicultural hemisphere much of its cultural vitality. For the ancestors of the Maroons, this Creolizing process was part and parcel of the struggle for survival on the fringes of the plantation world. As such, it was itself part of the process of resistance. Self-determination, traditions of government creating new societies away from the plantations could not be achieved through cultural creolization alone. In order to survive, early Maroon groups needed to devise ways of regulating social and economic life, rights and obligations toward neighbors and kin, mechanisms for dispute settlement and rules of leadership, succession, ownership, marriage and inheritance all had to be established. Free to experiment, Maroons succeeded in developing a range of political systems that effectively fulfilled these needs. In the early days, political organization was frequently shaped by military considerations. strong and able leadership, often backed by religious sanctions, helped to ensure survival in societies under siege. Among the early Maroon leaders who achieved fame for their exceptional qualities were Nani and Kojo of Jamaica. In later years, the treaties many groups made with colonial governments led to a gradual erosion of autonomy. Nonetheless, some Maroon societies maintained distinct political systems stemming from the early days. Jamaican Maroons also maintain their own special system of local government. The Windward Maroon community of Moortown, for example, is led by an elected chief bearing the title Colonel, who works together with under-officers and an appointed council known as the Gamatai Committee. Disputes between individuals over sections of commonly held Maroon lands, and a host of other relatively minor problems, are aired and resolved in the context of committee meetings. Issues that concern the entire community, on the other hand, require larger gatherings called township meetings, to which the general public is summoned by blowing the akbeh, a West African signaling device made from a cow's horn. These communities carry on the proud traditions of self-government established and maintained over the generations by their predecessors. Maroon arts, in spite of the grim struggle for survival that was part of everyday life in the early days, Maroons were able to create vibrant, distinctive and diverse artistic traditions. These expressive forms, music, dance, verbal arts, foodways, crafts, architecture, personal adornment and others drew upon the Maroons' African heritage as well as Native American and European resources, but emerged as something new and unique. The very existence of these remarkable Maroon arts demonstrates that even peoples under siege have been able to produce great beauty. They have been able to remain deeply concerned about human intangibles, such as aesthetic expression, upon which the quality of life depends. Contemporary Maroon people's identities are rooted in memories of the collective struggles from which their societies emerged. In most Maroon communities, a profound sense of history pervades present-day life. Among the Akompong Maroons of Jamaica, for example, celebrations are held every January honoring the great Maroon leader, Kojo, who signed the treaty with the British in 1739. Attended by thousands of visitors, this annual event centers on old Maroon songs, dances and ceremonies passed down from the ancestors. The following song speaks of the Maroons' continuing tradition of self-government. Lawhold o Maroon lawhold already a long Tigawalo lawhold o lawhold already o come give me no the hand at a long Tigawalo lawhold ho the Maroons' own laws still hold, the song asserts, and their right to govern themselves forever has been ratified in writing to which the note in the song refers. Likewise, the Moortown Maroons commemorate their famous ancestors and spiritual leader, Nani, with a festival every October. As part of the ceremony, Maroon men sometimes conceal themselves from head to toe in the leafy vine known as cocoon. This ingenious camouflage, which Maroons call ambush, was used by the ancestors during their battles against the British more than 2 centuries ago. In most contemporary Maroon communities, oral historians remain an important source of knowledge about the past. In Suriname, Jamaica and elsewhere, narratives about first-time the early days of flight and struggle are told with great emotion and circumspection, and only in certain contexts. While a portion of this cherished historical knowledge may be shared with outsiders, much of it is held sacred and kept secret. Maroon communities no longer face the same challenges that confronted them during their formation. Slavery is gone, but nowadays there are new challenges. Though different in character from the old, they nevertheless threaten the survival of Maroon communities as distinct groups with unique identities. Maroon villages are no longer as isolated as they once were. In some places roads have been built where none existed before, in others, new modes of transportation, such as airplanes and canoes with outboard motors, have made Maroon communities more accessible. External pressures ranging from civil wars to government welfare programs erode and threaten to undermine the freedom and autonomy that Maroons fought so hard to win. The growing number of young people are migrating out of their communities to urban centers. Those who stay know less and less about the traditions of their ancestors. Maroon ways must now compete with the allure of the world of outsiders for the attention of the young. Pollution impinges on the natural environments in which Maroons live. Governments have changed hands since the original Maroon treaties were made. Ironically, the ending of colonial rule has left Maroon communities with treaties that remain sacrosanct to them, but which present governments may find anachronistic copy to 1979. The ambiguous status of these treaties has placed Maroon communities in a vulnerable position. It has threatened the systems of communal land tenure maintained by several communities, and in some cases has compromised the authority of their leaders. Relationships between Maroons who have left their communities of origin to reside permanently in the cities and those who have stayed home are often ambiguous and sometimes strained. The unique languages, bodies of knowledge and skills that are integral to Maroon identity and culture are in danger of not being passed on, and in some cases threaten to disappear within 1 or 2 generations. In the face of these challenges, Maroons have applied their ancestors' spirit of creativity and resistance in new ways to meet modern circumstances. Jamaican Maroon leaders in Moortown and Hong Kong are working to educate and encourage younger Maroons in the traditions that are their birthright. These elders are also investigating ways of developing a sensitive and respectful type of cultural tourism that would provide employment for their children and might encourage them to remain in their home communities. Though the challenges that faced the earliest ancestors were of a different kind, similar questions of adaptation and survival, self-determination and identity, and innovation and continuity are very much alive for their descendants. In the 21st century, these questions remain as much a part of Maroon existence as they were some 500 years ago when the courageous ancestors of these people first began to fight for the right to remain their own masters,